Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. It's been a difficult week, but I'm going to cover it in the second part of the video. Right now, let's just get the frontline updates so we're on the same level on what's happening on the ground. Around the area of Kherson and the bridgehead that the Ukrainians have established, there's been no major progress so far. There are battles reported there, but Ukrainians are not following up on expansion on that bridgehead. Around the south, this is where probably my job as a commenter becomes problematic because right now Ukraine is not really advancing that much. I can explain where the advancement was. Deep State has finally acknowledged what I was doing a video on, where Ukrainians kind of flanked a little bit. So this part has been kind of now taken by Ukrainians. Additionally, just today, we know that this northern part of Robotyne has been taken by Ukrainians. Then there is the certain part of the north of Priyutne, like around here, was also kind of taken. But this is all very, very small scale gains, right? And because this is not the point of Ukrainians, it doesn't mean that the fighting is not there. The fighting is there, but it's a fighting that is happening both directions. Russians are very actively using their resources. They are counterattacking with a lot of forces, so they are stalling Ukrainian progress. And essentially right now, Ukrainians, they are in a grinding time to kind of get rid of these Russian resources. They want to get rid of this. And for a lot of people that we follow, I said it in the previous video, I'm going to tell it in the next videos, that for us, we just do not see a lot of things that are happening on the ground, so it's hard for us to evaluate. Therefore, I am continuing hearing, oh my God, Georgie, does this mean that counteroffensive is ending and so on? No, Ukraine just started their offensive. It didn't went the way that they wanted. We now know a little bit more about this, but it ended up being like they switched to a different style of offensive. Remember, they still have plenty of time for the weather to stay nice and warm. I would consider that potentially until late August, this is what we're going to be seeing. For us, as an observers, this is going to be just like, oh, look, nothing's happening on the map, therefore it's stalling. However, if you look at the number, for example, of artillery pieces being destroyed by Ukrainians, you will clearly see that no, things are actually happening. But I'm going to touch on it a little bit later. Then around the area of Avdiivka, Russians were able to kind of clear out the rest of the Vesele village. It's up here in the north. It's a part that the Russians were having. But again, Avdiivka is a big fortified position. It's been there on the front line since the start of the war, start of the big invasion, sorry. And this is where things are up. On the Bakhmut area, there are reports from Ukrainians that they want to get to this Andriivka. They want to build like a tunnel towards Andriivka. There are again reports that Russians were counterattacking a lot during this week, and beyond that, Ukrainians have a little by little advanced forward. The same is around Berkhivka, where his situation is even slower. So a lot of grinding battles. This is literally, like, how would I say? This was a work week, like a very, very tough work week. Obviously, the most kind of controversial part that is happening right now is the Russian spoiler attack. Now, I talked about it extensively during my previous video this week. You should watch it right now. I'm going to post the link somewhere up. And right now, there are kind of two main attacks. I told you that there was a grouping of forces around Kremina and there was a grouping of forces around the north. Well, we now know where the main kind of attack points are ongoing. There is a attack force that is going from the north towards Kupiansk-Vizlovy, but it's a lesser attack point. So the expectations were that this might be the main one, but it turned out to be not it. The main ones are as follows. I should use red for Russians. It is around Kremina to Liman, and here the battles are fierce. Ukrainians are having really big troubles. I wasn't gonna lie, you guys, it's really bad out there. Like, people are having big trouble holding on to this Russian offensive. And secondly, it's this salient right over here. I think the best it's seen if you just unroll kind of deep state map. So you can see in the last couple of days, Russians have poured a lot of forces into breakthrough on this salient here on Novoyehorivka. And right now, Deep State has not yet been updated, but we can clearly say that Novoyehorivka is pretty much taken, or at least very heavily contested right now. So Russians are having their success where they're breaching offensive, with a breaching some territory. But this is what I was saying. We should expect that potentially some ground will be lost. I explained it again in details last time, why it is expected and what Ukraine should be doing. But I also want to say that I believe that Ukrainians are trying to weight their possibilities. Because as I talked, and we still see that not a lot of additional resources are being sent to the southern front line. Most of them are being still held in reserves. Ukraine has significant reserves of manpower, equipment. Like, there is a lot of material that Ukraine still haven't utilized. This is something we need to remember before you start crying wolf and saying and panicking, oh my God, Russians are taking a town or one or not, and Ukrainians are not advancing. Oh my God, what is happening? Ukrainians still have the prepared resources that they can utilize. Never forget that. Until we see them being engaged anywhere, this is not going to change the general expectations of the current summer offensive. Next thing is going to be hard for me to cover, so I'm going to be threading on a thin ice here, because every time someone talks about problems within Ukrainian military, Ukrainian state, it's a very narrow pathway towards being labeled a propagandist and so on. So I'm going to try to explain what challenges Ukraine is facing, but I want you to take away very clearly that these are challenges that Ukraine needs to resolve. This does not mean that the offensive will not succeed, has not been successful, that the war is lost, or anything like this. Everything is still going fine. But there are certain things that can use certain improvements. And the first thing is understanding there has been a couple of very high level kind of OSINT special experts and so on that went and talked with a lot of Ukrainian military men to understand what was the situation on the front line, how the things happened with the offensive, and what were the challenges Ukrainian military faced. Essentially, why we ended up in a situation where it's a grinding offensive of Ukrainians trying to weaken Russian positions rather than a flawless charge to the Black Sea. And first and most important thing was the lack of equipment. A lot of promised equipment, especially secondary equipment, such as important one, as you might understand by now, mine clearing equipment. A lot of, for example, support equipment like mine clearing ones were not delivered on schedule, on time. Like a lot of the high names were tried to be pushed for, like we need additional X number of main battle tanks, we need X number of infantry fighting vehicles, but a lot of this support equipment that is required by Ukrainians were not delivered in time. We talked about why, because no one is knowing, no one was expecting that the mining would be such a big problem. And we already talked about that it's a combination of efforts that demining equipment just cannot just go and demine things because it instantly gets targeted by aviation, and Ukraine doesn't really have a lot of counter aviation. Main Ukrainian anti-air systems are essentially shoulder mounted, like this is like Stingers and Strelas and some closer range support, which has maybe 2, 3, 5, 6 kilometer range, whereas certain helicopters or planes, they can engage from a 10 or 12 kilometer distance very, very precisely. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem that we're kind of hoping that it would be resolved, but unfortunately, with certain adaptation, this made things harder for Ukrainians. Second thing was that the big check, like, can Ukrainians do a large scale combined arms warfare? Like a big question. And the answer, unfortunately, is no. New brigades, while like this is something that I was very, very scared of, right? Because I've seen good examples of like a combined armed warfare, but those were like, super hyper experienced brigades, like 93rd Brigade and everything, like Azov and so on. Like the things the people that were in a battle from like 2014. With these new assault brigades, a lot of people are just freshly like a volunteer mobilized people. And my biggest question was, yes, they did proper training in like personal tactics. We see this when we look at the videos of trench clearing and so on. They're very, very effective. My biggest problem was how would be the cooperation between units, how would be cooperation with other forces, and unfortunately, so far, it is not to the expectations. And before you start, oh my God, but they were trained by NATO. Yes, but Ukrainian army is not NATO army. Ukrainian army doesn't fight like NATO army. There's a lot of like asterisks and yes, but like a lot of these yes buts are there that doesn't make it like a proper combined arms professional NATO army. It's mostly mobilized people. Like because the unfortunate truth that a lot of people are missing out is that people with experience have died. A lot of people that are the real professionals that were these major pillars of ability to both train and control troops and everything, they just died. People get killed at war. And that's the horrible part. And then there's other problems. So additional problem, there is a big question right now in Ukrainian society, for example, like why is Ukrainian production so inefficient, right? Why is we're seeing, for example, these Lancet drones production that Russia is showing off? Firstly, it was a little bit of a fake. Let's put it this way. It was like a lot of play with mirrors, but generally speaking, it is known that Russia is increasing their production. And I know that the NATO countries are also increasing production, so that is important to take in account when we're talking about supply to Ukraine. But there is a lot of internal questions in Ukrainians. Why has not domestic production caught up to the requirements of the army? Weren't there supposed to be also production mobilization? And people say, yes, maybe on a territory of Ukraine that will be problematic because Russia can strike, but we know that there has been at least negotiations with Poland. There are options when things one need to get solved. So it's not completely clear why Ukrainian production is so lackluster. So right now there is only a certain number of munitions that are being produced, but a lot of the projects that are very crucial for Ukraine are not being developed. Then there is the question why drone fleet is still not an issue, not a resolved issue for military. Why is it still civilians that need to donate and get these drones like FPV drones and other drones be essentially crowdsourced? Why it cannot be done by the government request, and these kind of questions, right? You see actual working questions. We can talk more about certain live streams, about any other ones, but the point is that they've pointed out there is a certain number of problems that Ukrainians are facing that are preventing them to just, I don't know if you can even call steamroll, because steamrolling would expect that Ukraine has an overwhelming advantage over Russia. And this is where we get into the kind of another point is because we got so used to thinking that, well, Russia is kind of shit. They just have a lot of stuff. So, but they still can do damage. And unfortunately that's a lot of stuff that can still do damage. And that's a lot of stuff that is doing damage to Ukrainians. And this needs to be cut through, and it's a lot more than I believe our human brains can process, like, because seeing all these like tens, like every day we're seeing tens of artillery pieces being destroyed. How much artillery are there in German military? How much artillery is there in Swedish military? How much artillery is there? Ukraine in a 1 month destroyed over 700 pieces of artillery. Like, show me a European state that would suffer damage of 700 pieces of artillery and then keep going. It's a big grinding effort, and Russia has a lot of shit. Like, mostly because of the Soviet Union. It's just incredible that we are in this situation. And that's why it's so infuriating when we are seeing just Ukraine being denied the necessary tools to protect itself. Like just recently, basically Joe Biden finally voiced what we all knew before, is that not sending ATACMS to Ukraine is his own personal choice. Basically, it was said out loud that this is a deliberate choice by the Biden administration. So a lot of challenges for Ukraine, and comes especially because of the problematic nature of the war that is happening. This week was problematic for me because I returned from vacation, so I needed to pick up. I had like some of the vacation amnesia, one might say. There was issues understanding me, like what I was doing at my work before I left vacation, like and why was certain things happening, just to kind of get back into the rhythm. But secondly, it was a very challenging because we saw Russians targeting Odessa, and again we saw the civilians being destroyed. And right now I got onto this very like sensitive part of the, like if you've been following this war, like you have these ups and downs, like how you follow the war. Like you're very optimistic, then you get into this more sensitive negative part and so on. And that was a little bit of a downswing this week for me, and I really took it to a heart. It really struck me, like when I saw the pictures of the destruction, when I saw again people being killed, dead bodies and so on, and just that sense of injustice, sense of like absolute rage and desperation. And especially when United Nations, I already talked about United Nations as how useless it is, but generally speaking, that we have some kind of a system in a world that was promoted to us to be like, this is the new world order. We build it so nothing that happened during the Second World War, when an authoritarian leader came to power and just started killing people, that we would prevent that we would try to make checks and balances to make sure that the rule of law prevails, to make sure that people that really go outside of it and really start doing evil things, that they will get punished. And it's very discouraging to see that that same system that we built, that same system that we're being sold to as the ultimate rule of law, this is the what builds the just world, we are now seeing that same system protecting Russians. The same system is looking at aggressors, or even Ukraine and Russia, and either both siding them, or trying to call for some kind of unjust peace, or trying to remove any kind of pressure from the aggressor, from a country whose both army and the government and leader has committed every single war crime possible. At what point we became jaded to that? And this just absolutely blind rage bordering like desperation was just overflowing me this week. And I just couldn't believe that this is still being sold to us as a potential continuation. It looks like a farce. And a lot of this farce is really getting on my nerves, at least during this week. So I'm really hopeful we see certain developments, but it's definitely not helping that we are now just taking for granted Ukrainians being killed by Russian missiles every day. And we say, well, okay, it's now just a war zone, like it's the same as any other place. And just do nothing. Like forgetting that it was supposed to be like Russia was one of these countries that were supposed to protecting the peace. That is what I think. That is what the week was. That is what the challenges Ukraine is having, guys. Thank you so much for continuing following this channel. I will do more videos this week. I love you all. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.